Welcome to Managing Your Perimeter. I'm Anna Reel, and together with PJ O'Neill and our lovely returning guest, Jason Russell, we are going to talk kind of back to school security, but we also use Jason as our barometer when we talk about things that have happened during the summer, current event things, get his perspective on stuff. So, um, quickly, as always, I'm going to just jump in here. PJ, how are you? What's going on? Where are you?
Good. I'm at home in the beautiful suburbs of Chicago where it's painfully hot and raining today. Um, I was just up in Oshkosh for the air show last week. And my son just got back last night. He was there the entire week. Um, and it's been a whirlwind of travel this summer so far, but
Yeah,
I'm home for a little bit.
you were definitely out there doing some advanced work, so it was nice to hear your stories and everything. Yeah, I'm sitting in Tennessee in I have the luxury of having my son's podcast office, so yay! I make him set me up. But anyway, no, it's been a very quick summer. We're already starting the Olympic walkthroughs for all the sites. So it's been a whirlwind, as always. Here we go. But anyway, Jason, please welcome back. Love having you here, as always. Um, I would like you today, this time, could you just start us back from the beginning, how you got started in this business, how your business got started? I know it had to deal with your family. So if you could give our listeners just a brief over again of how that started.
Yeah, yeah, happy to do it. And thanks for having me on again. I always like joining you guys for this. I started off as a police officer in the 1900s, um, so way back when, right?
You
And
retired your horse and buggy,
I did,
and
yeah.
yeah,
Back when you had to go to a call box and they'd be like, "We need you over here." They talked like old timey cops back then. So um, crime don't pay. See, they don't do like that anymore. But anyways, so I started off as a police officer, and then I went to the Secret Service and was a special agent with the Secret Service for a number of years. Left the Secret Service and did a couple other federal stints, and then in 2013 I started my security consulting firm. I had at that time my I had kids in elementary school and middle school. Now they're all graduated, or at least one's in high school and one's a teacher now, actually. So it was right around the time of the Sandy Hook tragedy, and I think obviously that impacted everybody, but certainly when you had younger kids, and with my experience, I thought, man, there's got to be a better way to keep kids safe. So I started my consulting firm, was at that time called Secure Education Consultants. And actually, my wife owned childcare, so that was another reason for starting that. And that was kind of aimed at early childhood education at the time, really with a focus on kind of assessing spaces and providing them with better ways to keep themselves safe without adding a bunch of new technology or cost, right? So, uh, and from 2013, we grew pretty rapidly. And now we work in, I think, 48 of the 50 states. We haven't gotten Hawaii yet. We're still trying to get there. And we work with schools, businesses, you name it. In 2023, I started a kind of a ancillary business called SEC Shield, which is actually personnel. So we have, by fall, we'll have about close to 300 employees in that business as well. So everything from directors of security that we place both in corporate environments and education environments, and then also armed and unarmed safety staff. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Oh, wow. Gosh. Yep, definitely grown. Loving to see it. It's been amazing to watch you. When you talk about that, the personnel that you do, is that just for permanent placement or do you do temporary things or?
Yeah, we started off obviously doing assessments in schools and watching how security was done in schools. I realized that it was a the incorrect model. So I always talk about relationships when I talk about security, and I think about how most places staff security. They staff it very much like an event, like you guys are familiar with, right? Where when you're at an event, it's very short time spans. You don't really need to develop you don't go to a concert and you don't need to get to know the security guard that's telling you don't jump on stage. But if you're in a school, right, or you're with kids, you want consistency and you want people that are there to develop relationships and aren't going to jump to a new location every day. And we just saw that schools were actually very much using that kind of event security model. And we really wanted them to kind of more adapt to a relationship security model, which costs a little bit more. So you want to pay the people better, train them better, but then you get better consistency and I think an overall better product. So that's kind of where we focus. We do actually do some kind of more event type stuff, but usually higher end where there actually is interaction. So it's not just a body in space, it's actually a person that can make decisions and use some judgment. So we work with LPGA and some of their tournaments. We do some work in some concert venues, but kind of higher end theater type situations, a lot of schools as well as some nonprofit.
Oh, wow, that's great. No, and it's nice to see that. I just wondered if, it was just, again, more on the temporary side or in the permanent, but the permanent placement, obviously, like you said, works better with that relationship like you're discussing. I mean, the kids need to get to know these people, and trust them, right? I mean, I think that's what a lot of what this is all about, just getting that build up going. And yes, in our world, I don't need to know your name. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just just make sure that the door is okay and the gate is good. So that's how I am. So
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I mean, I think it's interesting because a lot of people don't recognize that there's a significant difference, right, in the quality and in how you do that. So we focus really heavily on just relationships and trust and all those things, which I think are important in schools and in some other environments where you're going to have interactions with the same organization repeatedly and the same people, right? So it's the same staff, the same employees, all those things. So.
mm,
how do you manage or weigh, what you talked about a little bit last year when you get to the relationship thing, people can tend to become a little complacent in what they're doing if they're seeing the same thing every day. How do you manage that on a permanent basis?
For our staff, we really focus on just regular training, right? I think the reason people get complacent is because you just don't think about security on a daily basis because things security wise don't necessarily pop up every day, right? So I tell organizations this all the time. You can go without a security director for a long time and not even really recognize that maybe you needed one. If you didn't have an HR person in your organization, you would notice by the end of the first day, right? Because HR issues pop up every day. Security issues don't pop up every day, but when they do, they're so significant that they can damage an organization permanently, right? So what we try to do with our staff is get them to understand that complacency is we can't fall into that. I think it's a normal human kind of nature to fall into that. So what we try to do is actually just continually remind them, right? Drip training where we're constantly bringing up new topics, sending out new information, and then spot checking them, right? We're in our environments with our district managers, weekly, sometimes daily, just to make sure that we're not having people that are sitting there talking on their phones and they aren't interacting with with our clients, particularly in our schools where they're interacting with kids. And, if they're in an elementary school, they should be giving high fives. If they're in a high school, they should be doing fist bumps. And when they're not doing that, we know that they're getting complacent and we try to address it pretty quickly.
hey, so as we go into this best back to school edition, PJ has a junior. Erin, our producer, has well, she's not a senior, she's going into college. Maybe if you could sort of give us a little bit of idea, so because this is both in the college level now, right? So where does your company fit into that? I know a couple of years back, I think you were doing assessments at colleges. I think you did some things at Alabama, if I remember correctly. I mean,
Yeah, so we've been working with higher ed for quite a while. It's a different environment because of just right, in a K-12 school, everything is very contained and you're dealing with, it's very simple to contain a single location. I can lock the doors and I can keep everybody inside. And there's still security concerns, certainly in those situations. A college is totally different. You're dealing with kids that maybe have obviously usually never been away from home.
mm,
And they're out, they're probably drinking, even though, I didn't drink in college or since.
Me either.
Um, yeah, never. But they're certainly doing those things right. So sometimes judgment can be impaired. And you're used to, particularly kids, if you're going to college, you're used to kind of being protected by your parents and you've been in school. So I think part of what we try stress to not only the parents but also the kids is learning a little bit of situational awareness, right? Paying attention to your surroundings. We particularly focus on not putting yourself in situations where you're more likely to run into problems from a security perspective, right? So not, being with people that you don't know, not getting, certainly drunk to the level where you're making bad choices and bad judgments, and all those things that kind of hopefully keep you out of a bad situation where security or your safety could become an issue.
PJ, when you and your son are out there looking, and I know that he has a particular school that he wants to go to, but I'm sure there's got others in there. Are you having these conversations with him?
We haven't started really looking together yet. We've really just talked about what he wants to do, where he wants to go. His mindset, I think, has shifted a little bit there where is and my son's very interested, Jason, so you know, in aviation and flying. He wants to be a pilot. And he wants to be a fighter pilot. So he was looking very hard at Air Force and Naval academies, with Air Force being the preference. But I think last night he came home after meeting a bunch of pilots and airmen at Oshkosh, and he said, he's like, I think I might want to go the ROTC route to have a more um, general college experience than the one that the academies are going to have. And I'm like, okay. Well, so what does that look like? So I mean, we haven't looked yet. He hasn't seen anything in particular other than visiting his sister at Auburn when we would go down there. But so no,
One,
that's the very long answer to your question of have we had the conversations yet about um, situational awareness? Yes, because I let him go to events all on his own and just just keep an eye open.
one of the things that I did when I toured with my kids was if they didn't bring security up as a parent, I think sometimes parents were a little bit apprehensive to actually, we don't want to think about it. And I think sometimes the mistake that schools make, and I noticed this when I toured both of my daughters, um, was that often they don't want to point it out, even when there's opportunities to do so, and even when they could do it in a way that's positive. So actually, what's interesting is as we consult with universities, one of the things that I talk to them about is sharing what they do for safety and security. So how am I going to be communicated to as a parent when something happens, right? What are the resources that my student would have when they're at the university in terms of safety and security? If I leave class late, is there somebody that can escort me to my dorm? Or, when you're walking around the campus, they should be pointing out, the blue light poles that have the call boxes and things like that, where the lighting is. So, what's interesting is, I went to Western Michigan University for my undergraduate and then Michigan State for my graduate school. And I toured my daughter at Western Michigan. And of all the colleges I went to, they did the best job of highlighting safety and security, not in a way that was scary, but I think in a way that was like, hey, these things exist. Hopefully your child will never need them. But if they do, we've thought about these things. They actually had one of their police officers come in and give like a really quick 5-minute kind of, here's who we are, here's what we do. And I was so impressed with that. And I think as, as you're kind of touring schools, don't be afraid to ask those questions, because I think sometimes if you don't, they're not going to tell you. And if they don't have the answers to those questions, that's a whole other set of issues that you have to consider.
I would like to do is maybe shift a little bit. We just finished the World Cup, right? And obviously there was a lot of fencing, there was a lot of security. Everybody was very aware. I had one of my sons go to 2 of the games. Um, all of our colleagues were very involved in building all of that stuff. What is your take on how the US did, and Canada and Mexico for that matter? Mm.
I think security is really good when you don't hear anything about it, right? Like as a security professional, you don't want to be the story, and you certainly don't want security to be the story. So I think particularly an event of that magnitude where that the you know everything that's happening, safety and security, is magnified to such a high level, and you have people from all over the world that are going to see what we do here, and
Yeah.
and certainly anything is going to be judged harshly, right? So small security breaches in major events I mean, you can be perfect 99.9% of the time, but the only thing people are going to remember is the 0.1%. So what I would say is the fact that we heard nothing about security
Right.
is the best testament that you could give to organizations like you all and local law enforcement and federal authorities and everybody who really worked to plan that event is we didn't hear anything about security. That's the best thing that can ever happen. So I think it was handled extremely well
Yeah.
for what is truthfully such a complex operation. I know the planning was going on for years for that. And it's nobody's ever going to say, hey, great job, security. It's just one of those things you expect to be handled correctly. You don't get an award for that. You only get noticed when things go wrong. So
Well, and
No,
it looked like, you had all of these great celebrations of America by the foreign fans, right? And I think the cooperation between local law enforcement with the security procedures from FIFA, I'm sure they were all briefing together, but kind of the light touch they did take with the fans, like the Norwegians doing their Viking row and in the middle of the street, right? And not being like, hey, you got to break everything up. Just kind of letting things go while keeping an eye on it is how it allowed everyone to enjoy it. And for Americans to experience new stuff and for our foreign guests to experience America in a way that was positive is how I saw it.
I think we needed more security on the field with the punches I saw being thrown on the field.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was your biggest security risk was the players uh,
Mhm.
beating up each other. But
Yeah.
I think you're right, PJ, was letting people, those situations where it's like, look, you probably could enforce some rules. I'm sure there was open alcohol containers in places where there probably wasn't supposed to
No.
be. So, I mean, Scotland alone, I think, had
Yeah.
most of them from what I heard. I
Right.
definitely want to meet their fans because it sounded like a lot of fun. But I think, there's ways to do security correctly and then there's ways to overdo it. And I think the U.S. as a whole, as well as Canada and Mexico, did a nice job of just making it a nice, safe, but also allowing people to have fun and experience those events, which I think, it was such a great World Cup. It was probably unprecedented in terms of the number of people that participated in it, particularly here where that's not our sport. I think it really Americans came around to it, which is great.
No, it was nice to see, and it was nice that I don't know, that everybody kind of paid attention. You knew if you were going to a stadium, here's what you were in for. There was nothing like people complaining about long lines or any of that. It really was, this is what's expected. Here's what you're going to have to go through. Nobody wants anything to happen. We all want to have a good time. So just participate and cooperate. And, I think that you'll get the experience you want because definitely for things like World Cup, Olympics, Super Bowls, things like that, it's all about guest experience. And I truly believe that we managed that for any of the guests that came in. I think the US did a great job. I was very happy. And off camera, we did have this conversation. I go, unless we know differently, I don't think that Jason has heard anything differently, and I hope that he would share if he did. But, we heard nothing. And, clearly we all have our ways of hearing other things. And I heard nothing. I heard nothing but good things. And I was very, very happy for that because I was worried. I was like, how is the US going to handle this? We've never done this, and US citizens don't like all of this. They don't want all of this and they don't want it to always have to be and they don't want it to be so regimented except when it's something like this and they all embraced it. So I was happy to see that. So
Yeah.
glad that your take was the same on that one.
Yep.
Was there anything you learned from your former colleagues or existing colleagues from the FIFA or anything you observed that will be taken forward, kind of looping back into to back to school with all the college football games coming back on now, and last year and previous years we've touched on, those are the after the bell issues, as you put them, right? That's where your biggest concerns always are now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that we're seeing is just the different threats that you have to prepare for that 5 or 10 years you didn't have to, right? So drones in particular, right? Like all this new technology that now you have to really consider, that certainly is being considered for those large scale events, but it's definitely going to apply to a large high school football game, right? I mean, we do a lot of work in Texas. Some of those high school football games in Texas have more attendees than college games in some other places. So I think that the use of technology and the understanding of where kind of the threat spectrum can come from now, in some ways it's a little bit overwhelming because you have to literally plan for almost everything. But I think taking some of those lessons learned, or at least those concepts, and applying them to these smaller venues like high school football stadiums and sporting events, I think will be important for school security people.
This episode of Managing Your Perimeter is brought to you by First Fence, the experts in keeping what matters most protected. Whether it's a temporary fence for your next big event or a permanent solution for your business, First Fence delivers with speed, precision, and peace of mind. Trusted by pros in construction, events, and beyond, they've got safety down to a science. Need a fence? Get it done right the first time at firstfence.com.
I did want to focus a lot on, because we definitely have our producer and PJ who've got these kids going to college and stuff like that. I did notice that a lot of the stadiums that weren't used prior, the big football stadiums in college, are now being used for concerts. I'm going to use Alabama as the example. Now, all of a sudden, right, they're going to open this up again, which, I know Alabama is pretty tight and everything, and that's how they do it. And yes, I do talk about Alabama a lot, but so how do you think the schools are going to be able to adapt to those kinds of things? Because it's new and it's not new. These kids go to these concerts all the time, but now all of a sudden it's now back on their campus where they, haven't had that for a while. And now they're kind of bringing that back in.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is having a consistent plan. So I think, instead of kind of the plan for the event, it's almost putting a plan in place that you can then roll out repeatedly over and over again with small tweaks, right? So whether it's a football game or, I'm in Michigan and this weekend, to your point, Morgan Wallen played, the big house, which holds 105,000 people. So figuring out ways that you can kind of apply the principles, which is, are we managing, how we're getting crowds in and out? Do we have, all those things, parking, like security from, I think one area that I always talk about is security from where people start to when they actually get to the venue is often where you see issues before and after events. So how are we kind of covering that what I call a transition area, right? From the tailgate area where they may have security to actually from there to the actual venue, and then getting people in, whether it's running them through weapon detection or whatever those things are, particularly, can create some and slow down the experience and create all these issues. One of the things I think that's been really done well is just the communication pre-event to people so that they're not bringing the wrong stuff, right? So they're not bringing bags and all the stuff that they're not supposed to bring, because that speeds up your process to get through. And then once they're inside, just managing the crowd appropriately, having people in observation areas. And I think not overreacting, right? When you're in a concert venue, you're going to have loud people, you're going to, but trying to manage the crowd appropriately. And one of the areas I think that we focus on when we manage events, even though it's on a smaller scale, is really teaching our people like de-escalation skills. I don't want my security staff enforcing rules unless they absolutely have to. Like on their list of tasks, enforcing a rule is the last thing I want them to do. I want them de-escalating. I want them actually being cheerful and those things, right? So that they're not there to step in and, drag somebody out. They're there to manage and make sure people can have a good time, but also, keep the area secure and be observant. And then to see something, say something. I hear that so often now, which I think is fantastic. And people actually do now. We see more and more, particularly with our school clients and our higher ed clients, where students and people will actually report things that they find suspicious. And I think that's going to be a good thing for us moving forward.
Oh, that's good. I do like to hear that. So just segueing a little bit, my sons and I invested in a sports team out of Oakland, California. It's the USL Soccer Oakland Roots and Soul. And I just received a phone call because they're building their own venue and they got a security plan from the chief of police, and it was very robust for theirs because they're basically growing from community event to now opening theirs, and they're going to have maybe a total of 8,000 attendees, which is fairly significant for them. And they asked me and they said, we just think this is too much. This is just a game where, we played and, this is so much. And yet they hosted the Australian team for the Australians practice facility. So they had to ramp things up for that. And so when they sent it to me, I was on the phone call and not 10 minutes into the call, they just kept saying, this is too much. The security is too much. Our community is not like that. Have you ever been here? Blah, blah. And I just stopped them and I just said, and yet you want to grow this and you're going to have 8,000 people and everyone's excited and you're coming off the tail of this World Cup that everybody's so excited about now. And the first thing you want to scale back on is security.
Yeah.
And the conversation just stopped. And I said, I'm not being rude. I'm just saying that's the last thing you want to scale back on. So I just walked them through some steps and everything. And we were discussing manpower, this many to this, the formulas, all those things. And I took it down a little bit and it was, more of your conversation of having more of a security team in place to learn how to de-escalate versus armed security all the time around that people are getting and that their community might push back a little bit, but sort of bringing their community around to it. But it was probably 3 conversations, lengthy Zoom calls with them for them to
Yeah.
sort of get it to click, that I'm like, it should be, please don't make this your last budget item. Like this should not be like that.
Yeah. I think it would be really nice. We run into this all the time, particularly around things like executive protection, where people are like, well, we don't think that there's a risk, and there may not be. So what I find is I say it would really be nice if I could tell you, if we could just deploy security 15 minutes before the bad thing happened, and then we'll pull them away right after, and you only have to pay for that 15 minutes. The unfortunate reality is security, when it's done well, nothing should happen, right?
Right.
So people don't necessarily equate nothing happening with security actually doing its job. They equate it with, well, maybe nothing was ever going to happen in the first place, right? So when security is done really well, nothing happens. People often think, well, maybe it's not necessary then. Just the opposite is true, which is the reason nothing happened is probably because we had these elements in place. So particularly when you're talking about budget, I think one of the things that is universal with security, and I haven't worked around this ever, and I don't think I ever will, is security decisions have to come from the top. If the person at the top of the organization doesn't believe in it, doesn't matter what everybody else thinks, because the head of the organization or the top of the organization has to make security and safety a priority. And if they don't, nobody else will. And I can tell you really quickly in looking at you show me a venue, you show me a manufacturing facility, I can tell you without ever meeting them how security conscious the president of that organization is, just by the security and by how people operate in that space. So it would be nice if we could predict when the bad thing was going to happen and then just put things in place ahead of time. But unfortunately, that's just not how it works.
Well, and people, I would guess, and maybe you run into this, they equate security in a visual sense as either people in tactical gear or Andy Frame, right? And you don't want people being scared at your event venue. And Andy Frame, there's a reason they barely exist anymore, right? There's a happy medium in there that people can have a great time at a venue, at an event, at a show, and not even know anything was going on. But people want to feel secure where they are, whether that's unconsciously or consciously.
Yeah. I mean, you make a good point, right? And I think that's one of the things we tell people is you can either have good security or you can have cheap security, but you can't have both. So you just have to decide what you want. When it's interesting you mentioned Andy Frame, not to beat up. I thought it was a guy for a while. I was like, I'm gonna meet this Andy guy. He's everywhere. Or
I
used to
think
be.
we all did.
Um,
Why are there 800 people named Andy wearing the same
yeah,
outfit
right.
here? Why
The
are some of them
LPGA
girls?
tournament we just did, we've started to slowly replace Andy Frayne, and it wasn't. I mean, it's just that he wasn't paying his people enough money to actually get quality people that actually wanted to do the tasks that they were there to do. But it was cheap, right? But after a while, you start to notice that cheap isn't good. And with security, what's very interesting, I call it the changing shirt model, where an organization is like, well, we want different security, but we don't want to pay anymore. And I'm like, then all you're going to do is just get a different color shirt. They're still going to suck as bad as the other company did. They're just going to be wearing a green shirt instead of a blue shirt, and they're going to be just as terrible as they were before. So, and I think that goes for everything, safety and security. If you want to do an event correctly, you have to plan for that event, right? And you have to invest money in that, and you have to invest resources in good planning and good, infrastructure. A lot of the work that you all do, right, is that has to be done correctly, and it has to be planned ahead of time.
Yeah, we are, as I mentioned earlier, so we're in the process of walking the venues for the Olympics. And, a lot of these venues, are ready. I mean, they're ready. We're just going in and helping, everybody kind of tweak what's already been talked about and what's been set up. And I will say again, just having the World Cup, everybody is aware that you can't skimp on this. This is not the event that we're going to go in and act like we can figure it out on the fly and do as much field fitting as possible. I mean, the planning is now, and this is what's going to happen. And I'm very happy to see that that's where it is, that we're not waiting for the last minute for this. Because we have to, our job is often that we get called in at the last minute. We're putting things together for Lindsey Graham right now. But, obviously he just passed, but it's usually like that with us. Like, we're coming in at the tail end of this, and we're going to make it work, and it's going to be what everybody needs. But I look at how we're all perceiving this and how much, and I think you said it, like, people are now saying, they're using to see something, say something, and people are saying things. And it is now, when I go into any kind of event and, they gave you the instructions, don't bring a bag this size, bring a bag this size. And I see people walk up and they're so shocked. I'm like, oh my God, we've been doing this for years, years, people. Like, what, what do you think has changed in these years? That you're going to walk in and talk your way into it with that massive big bag that you're carrying. So,
Yeah, security is always for other people. It's never for you, you know. So, and I think that's what generally people think, like, I'm not the problem, but all these other people are the problem, right? So I should be able to carry in a backpack or bring in whatever, right? But don't let anybody else do it. And I think that's, we started seeing this with, obviously, after 9/11, when, we started seeing this with TSA, right, where we had to do all these different things. People are getting more and more used to it. People still don't love it, but I think we've accepted that there's a certain level of discomfort that we're going to have to kind of
yeah,
face to make sure that we can stay safe in these environments. And as you said, I think particularly the larger events, this is built in. It's the smaller ones, like you described, Anna, where it's like this new soccer thing where they're like, we're not used to this. Well, they'll have to get used to it, because that's just the nature of sporting events and large gatherings of people, is you can't take the risk anymore,
right.
because bad things can and do happen.
Yeah. I basically said, I'm like, well, it's just going to take one time, and your entire thought process is going to change. But I would prefer that you're not waiting for that, that you're actually thinking about it.
Yeah. The best visual that I use, particularly when it comes to things like that, is, I think you think back to the United Healthcare CEO, and
Mm,
um, and you look at their stock. I think that's the best visual that exists for security, particularly with executive protection. But I think it applies to a lot of different things. You look at how much value their stock lost from the day before he was assassinated to the day after. It was in the tens of billions of dollars, right? For a fraction of a percent, they could have had a real safety and security plan in place that wasn't like, hey, loosey goosey, protect him when you feel like it. He
yeah.
can walk around by himself 90% of the time. Um, and that's a pretty strong visual, particularly when you can equate it with a bottom line somewhere.
Yes.
That's where people really start to.
Right.
So for some organizations, sometimes you have to say it's the liability side of it, right? And you can really pull litigation that shows that safety and security, you have to maintain a minimum level nowadays. And if you don't, and something happens, you're definitely going to be sued and you're going to lose. So sometimes that's the only way that people can kind of understand it.
Yeah. Bottom line, it's always about money sometimes, unfortunately.
Sure.
Hey, Jason, why don't you take a minute and give give our listeners that back to school speech you give so well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, particularly, I think because we talk a lot about, you know, higher ed today. I think
Mhm.
really getting if your kids are going away to college, there's really two pieces to this. There's you preparing, and then there's you preparing them or them preparing, right? So I think for parents, it's understanding all the different elements of where you're sending your child, right? How am I going to be communicated with if there's an emergency? What are the resources available on campus or nearby campus that would support if there was a safety and security incident? Uh, do I have, you know, can I track my kid's location in some cases? I remember when my daughter was a freshman, she's 26 now and I still can track her on her phone. She doesn't mind it. But I remember her first ever Michigan State University football game. I checked her location and it showed her in the middle of the Red Cedar River. And I was like, that's not good. She wasn't. It was like a little bit, the location was off, but I had to text her and I'm like, right, this is where it shows you right now in the middle of the river. And she's like, no, I'm actually in the stadium. So kind of the technology side, I think helps us be able to kind of at least better protect our kids. And then really preparing your child for being on their own. They're now responsible for their own safety and security, right? So that means I need to have some level of situational awareness. Kids, particularly nowadays, and I think adults, unfortunately, are so into our phones, and so we're not paying attention to what's going on around us. So that could be things like when you're going to and from class, if you're going to put headphones in, only put them in one ear, right? So you can hear what's going on around you. Certainly not putting yourself in situations where you're by yourself or that you're in areas where, you're more likely to be victimized. So certainly having two daughters and a daughter that's going to be a sophomore in college this year, I really focus heavily on, you know, being your own safety advocate. I teach a self-defense class. And one of the things we talk about is having kind of your own imaginary bubble around you. And that if people are going to get inside your bubble, that means you need to give them permission to do that. And if you don't give them permission, you need to, check them basically. When people are going to victimize, they look for people that are suitable victims. They look for people that aren't paying attention or people that, maybe don't have that kind of self confidence. Really quickly, interesting study they did of an attacker. This guy would attack women on a college campus, and they asked him how he chose his victims. And he had a very specific way that he would do it. He would go to this grocery store on campus, and he would take his grocery cart and he'd ram it. He'd find a girl that he thought he might want to try to victimize, and he would smash his cart into her. And if she apologized to him, he knew that that was somebody who would likely be a good victim because they weren't confident, and even though he had done something wrong, they were apologizing to him. So it's much easier to kind of get into somebody's to test boundaries and to test somebody's, what they're going to allow you to do if they don't have confidence and if they're not aware of their surroundings. And then once again, be aware of the resources that are available on your campus, whether it's how can I get a ride if I've had too much to drink or if I feel like I'm in an unsafe situation? Never going out by yourself, always being in pairs. One of the things that we taught my daughter's sorority is always having, if they were going to parties, always having a number of people that were not drinking and that were really their job was to keep an eye on everybody else. And you were not allowed to leave except for in one of two ways, either with the people you came with or in a safe ride. So kind of setting those parameters up and making sure people stick with them. And then just that kind of general situational awareness, trusting your gut instincts. If something doesn't feel right, there's a reason for that. You need to trust that. So those would be some of the initial things that I would say.
Perfect. That's perfect. PJ, as you're listening to this, and I know that he's continued to mention that he has the daughters, but you're feeling comfortable. This would be good for your son as well, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Jason, as always, thank you so much. You're always very valuable to this, and we love having you on in our annual thing. But we also love it because you ask us a question and to repeat something, and you make us sound very smart. So I will take that all day long from you. Um, but it's always lovely to have you. And listeners, we will put up how you can reach Jason, ask him any questions. He's always very available for this and is always very kind to do this with us. But we love having you here. So you can find us at www.arcusgrp.com. Again, continue to throw your questions to us. PJ and I are going to have our own little question and answer. We're going to pull these questions that we're getting in our DMs and answer them for you. I think we're just trying to get through the summer, as everybody is. And then we will get on here and tell everybody what we're listening to and what you guys want to know about. So thank you again, Jason, for being here. PJ, love having you. Aaron, as always, you're great to pull us all together. So take care, everybody, and stay safe out there. Thank you.